All right, well, good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Honestly, I want to just thank Tom and the rest of the leadership team for inviting me in today to share what I believe is a very important topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I know that your organization has committed time and resources to it as well. I want to start off by simply saying that we all are doing this not because it's just the right thing to do, because again, it's about paving the way for the future. Right? Really understanding how it connects to all of who we are and all of what we do. So today, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about me for context. We're going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm going to give you some board-suggested strategies that you can think about as you as a full board, and that you have a committee as well, can think about how you can move some things forward. At any point, again, I'm an open book. I want to make sure I get to anything that's on your mind or your heart as well. So again, thank you for the kind introduction, my friend. Thank you for doing your research as well. A little bit more about me. Again, born and raised here in town. Love Pittsburgh. Love this region. Love it that it's a little big city that has a lot to offer on a lot smaller of a scale. Now, tying Pittsburgh back to DE&I, I'm going to be honest with you. From my lived experience, we look at DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, through a funnel in this region. It's a very black-white conversation in Pittsburgh, right? You go to other major cities, that completely changes the scope of the conversation. But for our context, for our conversation, that's the world and the region that we live in, right? And now is that changing and shifting? Absolutely, right? But as you think about DE&I, which we'll get into here, we have to first start off by opening up our kind of definition in our context of how we approach DE&I. We also have to understand how DE&I is connected to our family and our upbringing. So on the screen there, you'll see, picture of me and my wife, married almost 5 years, and my wonderful dog, Remy. Man, it never get a puppy, y'all. That's a whole nother story. Wow. I should have had a kid versus a dog. At least the kid could give me a beer eventually out the refrigerator. I can go to work. Anyway, I believe it's important to think about how we were raised and where we were raised impacts our story in DE&I. Okay? Right? My wonderful wife, born and raised in Johnstown. Folks, they don't have anyone that looks like me in Johnstown. Right? So that impacts her family story with regards to DE&I. Right? So we have to understand that, right? I know most of your work is in the North Hills. That impacts your story. Right? That impacts your client. That impacts your market. Right? There's a certain population that resides in that space. Not saying that's the only population, but think about that as you're doing your work, okay? I have my friends as well, right? As we all are, right? So our friends, some of our friends become our family, right? And so this is where we can begin to diversify our networks. It's through our circles, right? The friends that we keep, the company we keep, as we think about diversifying that group, that's important. When you think about your trust circle, or you think about your own personal board of directors, if everyone looks like you, that's a problem. Right? Or if everyone has the same way of thinking, same background, that's a problem. Right? Because diversity of thought is almost just as important as diversity of other characteristics as well. And in order to get diversity of thought, you have to intentionally surround yourself with people that have different experiences as you. So that was me almost 40 years ago. I'm almost 40, y'all. Wow. Man, that's getting harder and harder to say. Wow, 40. I'm almost 40. So that was me, right? A long time ago going, oh my goodness, I have this thing called a disability. And the quote there is how I approach things now, right? I very much enjoy being different. I very much enjoy being unique, right? Not only by my characteristics, right? But also like how I see and engage with the world is different from many of you, right? And I love that, right? I love that experience and all of what it means, right? So this is little Chaz. I don't know what my mom and dad was dressing me in back then. And the 80s were a rough year for fashion statements, right? So that was me. My mom and dad, photos of me, my mom and dad. So I was born with a rare bone disease that causes my bones to break with little or no force. So the thing that all of you did of walking in the room today is something I never have experienced and never will. So I mentioned I'm almost 40 and I've broken about 43 broken bones over the course of my life. It's a rare genetic disorder. My mom also has the same disorder, except in the 80s, I love you to comment this, but you couldn't Google things like you can now, right? So my mom couldn't necessarily Google the disability as easy, right? So she didn't realize there were different types. So I have a more severe type than she does. So I've had about 13 surgical procedures as well, all to fix the bones. And, it's been a journey, right? I wear my baggage on my butt, right? You can see part of my journey. But everybody in this room has a story to tell, right? And everybody has things in their life or will have things in their life that's going to shape that story, right? And there's value in those stories. Hard times don't discriminate, right? I mean, that's hard times don't, no matter how much money you have, no matter what race you are, they don't discriminate, right? So trying to understand, trying to conceptually recognize and respect different people's perspectives is what diversity, equity, and inclusion is all about. I'm not trying to change your belief system. I'm not trying to change your morals. I'm not trying to change where you are politically, right? If we can simply begin to acknowledge, appreciate, and embrace that people see and engage with the world different from you, right? That's our why. One of the first things I encourage all of you to do and your committee is to figure out the why, right? Right now, DE&I is easy to be a trend. My challenge to you is how do you make it last beyond the trend? I don't have an intro for that. If I did, I'd be a millionaire. Right? But how do you make it not be a trend? Part of my recommendation is to figure out the why. Right? How do you get past just because it's hot? Look, let's keep it real right now. Our world, specifically the United States, changed, right, with the tragedies that we recently saw, specifically with George Floyd. Companies were doing DE&I before that, but they recognized that they were doing it poorly. They were checking boxes, folks, before that. Let's be real here again. Some still are. Right? Some still are. But now you see companies and organizations shifting to, having specific goals. Hiring goals, retention goals, right? We're going to have, our board is going to match the audience that we serve. That's how you get into it, right? That's how you really change the way you approach this work, right? But you have to figure out the why. And I would encourage you, each of you, to think about your own personal why, and then the organization has to figure out the organization why. Right? Is it to get more money? Right? Is it to diversify donors? Is it to diversify your network? Is it to get more people to donate food? Like, what is the why? Right? And that's something that you all got to figure out. I would strongly encourage you to not put the cart before the horse. You have to take a close internal audit. Do an assessment of your organization first. Right? That'll help you figure out the why. Okay? How we feeling? We okay so far?
Good.
Questions, comments, thoughts before I continue? My favorite color is blue. I like long walks on the beach.
If I may, when you were talking about the George Floyd situation, I was with UPMC and I was shocked probably last summer. The head physician had a call with probably 400 of the employees discussing Black Lives Matter, discussing our need as a community to help contribute money, time, recognition, and understanding of how this is changing.
Absolutely.
And I was pleased to finally see something like that from a very white organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. And again, the world shifted. Right. I mean that. Unfortunately, like all of the isms, folks have been around for quite a long time. right? Racism, sexism, ableism, and those have been around for forever. And you know, my goal, and again, this is a perfect world, is to put myself out of business. Right? I want diversity, equity, inclusion to be so naturally ingrained in the work we all do that you don't need somebody like me to come in and spend 40 minutes with you. Right? But it's like probably going to happen, probably not in our lifetimes. Right? The hope is maybe our kids will see some of that, but probably not in our lifetime. We probably won't see it go away. Right? And I think there's some slides in here, but the part that I really worry about, right, is the implicit bias piece, right? The stuff that we can't see. You know, I knew, and we're getting real deep here, but the natural racist or the natural ableist, I know, right? When people don't hire me, or when people don't let me come into the restaurant because of either I have a disability or I'm black, I know that. But the person that has the implicit bias, or that does small microaggressions, those are the people and the things that I really worry about for our future generations, right? And I don't again, if I knew how to fix it, I would be a millionaire, right? But those are the things that I think that we need to get to the bottom of. So one of my recommendations for all of you is to think about how you do trainings moving forward. How do you all as a board continue to educate yourselves, right? So Pittsburgh is rich in resources. Whether it's a learning management system where Tom or Eric or somebody finds a class that you all can take virtually, or you bring somebody into a board meeting, but you really educate yourself on microaggressions, biases. You really spend some time as a board understanding those things deeply. And the only way, there's no shortcuts, you have to be trained. Yes, you can read a book, Kendi has a great book. I can't think of the title right now, but there's a book list in here. But yes, you can do your own research, but you need actually some in-person scenarios. There's something about the actual trainer coming in with lived experiences. And I hate to say it like this, but to call you out, right? A book is safe. And I think there's a balance of that. But you need somebody to call you out, not you specifically, but you know what I mean, on that. So that's so important. Other thoughts, feelings? Good? Okay. So that's the goal, right? You've seen variations of this, right? You've seen there's one with a tree, there's a bunch of these, right? But the goal is liberation. So my next challenge for you as you think about what it means to be a board is how can you remove the policies, the barriers, or procedures that are preventing your organization from engaging with diverse audiences, right? And again, I don't have an answer for that, right? But as you interview, what type of questions are you asking? What's even your application process? Are you doing criminal record checks or financial record checks when the hiring process, right? What do you do for someone that's not, technology savvy, right? So what are the policies or procedures that are preventing you as an organization from engaging with diverse markets overall, right? Is it the language you're using? Are your bylaws or your policies written with a 6th grade language? What do you do for someone where English isn't their first language, right? So thinking about how we remove the fence to allow full engagement in the organization. Part of the work starts with diversity. I'm not going to read you that definition on your screen there. Very easy way to think about it, right? Is the intentional and authentic action of learning about people, places, and things outside of your normal, outside of your own circle, right? Very important to think about it. It's not just a black-white conversation, right? It's an intentional and authentic practice, right, of learning. Diversity is about learning, right? So when you go to get dinner tonight or in the near future, pick a restaurant that's not your normal cuisine choice. Next time you go buy a book, pick a book by an author that's different from your normal style, right? Many of us, maybe all of us in here, have one streaming service of movies or TV. Watch a movie that's not in English, right? Like, think about how you can challenge yourself, small and large, right? To simply be better, right? To simply do better, right? So there's more to this puzzle that we often think about. So we have to, as an organization, I would encourage you to define diversity, equity, inclusion for your organization. Right? We'll do, yes, there's textbook definitions, but what do those terms mean to you all as an organization? That's going to be very different, your definition, as it would be to the NAACP or the Latino Chamber of Commerce, right? Or a Highmark or UPMC or a PIT, right? The missions are different. So how does DE&I connect to those organizations? You all need to put pen to paper and define it for you, right? That could be a great committee activity, right? A board buy-in. Talked about this, but then again, you may have seen variations of this before, right? An iceberg, Titanic, that's the first thing we think about, right? 40% above the surface, the rest below. That's us. So again, the client that you're serving, right? Your participants, the folks that are riding your senior free ride, people going to your food, like what's below the surface for those people, right? What characteristics that live below the surface? And how do we begin to understand that? How do we begin people to be comfortable in being their true, authentic self? Right? There's power in that. And we're trying to aim here in the middle. Right? We're trying to aim in the middle of this slide here. We're trying to think about the middle. Right? So how do we put sort of diversity skills, our understanding, our awareness to get in the middle there? So again, this is going to take an individual challenge for you, but also as an organization or committee to think about that. I want to just mention very briefly this idea of intersectionality. Right? So nobody in this room is just one thing. Right? We're layered. Right? The multiple characteristics, the things that make us who we are, right, are layered. So while we may show up or appear physically with one or two characteristics, right, there's a multitude of other things that make us who we are that we have to start thinking about. And again, that leads to ultimately inclusion. And this is the piece I want you to put a lot of attention into. Right? So if we think about inclusion, right, what are we doing, intentionally or unintentionally, to make our clients, our members, our donors, our staff feel included? Because there's real science that supports what exclusion does to a person. All of us in this room in some way, shape, or form have been through an experience of exclusion. Whether all your colleagues went to lunch, right, or a happy hour and forgot you, whether your kid, your grandkid, a family member was left off of a classmate's birthday party, whether all your family members got together and left you off, those moments of exclusion leave an imprint on us. Mm-hmm. So we have to think about, as an organization, what we are doing, right? What we are doing that may cause that similar type of pain. Our brains respond to physical pain in a certain way. And a very similar part of our brain lights up and is triggered when we experience that pain of isolation or exclusion. So we have to be intentional, right, about how we're including. We talked about these terms a little bit. Again, I strongly recommend a full training on sort of, whether it be microaggressions or ally training or bias training. Again, there's a whole scope of extra things you can do in this space, but I would encourage you all to think about what you can do training-wise in this space. Now we get into the nitty-gritty of actions of what you can do. Before I do, questions, thoughts, feelings. This is supposed to be a little uncomfortable, right? You probably right now are going through in your mind a few things you've done or have seen or experienced that may be, harmful. Some of you have toned me out because this is not on your radar or scope, and that's fair, right? As a professional in this space, I know that. Not everybody cares about DE&I. I'm not naive, right? You want this little black guy that looks good in this green and red shirt to leave your room. I know I look good in this green and red shirt. But again, there's some point to this, right? Right? There's value in talking about it. There's a business case to DE&I, right? There's a business case, and some of you may need to think about it like that from a money standpoint, right? I can't afford Erica's golf. You have a golf outing?
Yeah. Oh, personally,
No.
But
Your organization. I can't afford to do your organization's golf outing, but I can give you $10. So how are you connecting to donors that can only give you $10? It's a real question, right? And we just talked about this, and I know your organization, right? I mean, I know Erica and Tom for a while, so I know your organization. So, but food, maybe I can't donate $10, or maybe I got some food in my pantry. How can I donate that? Right? So there's a business case to DE&I as well. So if you don't care about it personally, there's a reason business case wise you should think about it. Right? You could be losing some potential. When I log into your website, I don't know, I didn't do it. What are the images I'm seeing? If I come into the office, can I even get into your office physically as a person with a disability? I don't know the answer to that.
You actually can.
I can? Okay, good to know. I donated food once, but I stayed in the car.
I use a cane sometimes, so
Oh,
I made sure when I
okay.
started here that I could get
All right,
all the locations.
Good stuff, right? So there's a business case to really talk about this, right? And I want us to just be to think about that, right? If it's not important or near and dear to your heart, like why? No, again, go back to the why. All right. So from an administrative standpoint, here are some things I would think about that or encourage you to think about, right? So again, clarity of definitions. You already have a great public commitment. I would encourage you to every 2 years look at that public commitment, which is on your website. I know it's part of your strategic plan. How is it embedded into the culture? From an HR perspective, you don't have a lot of turnover, right? But again, what are you doing recruitment wise, retention wise? How are you promoting? Right? If I apply for a job in your organization, do you publicly share the compensation before I apply? What's the application procedure like? Right? Again, I mentioned what type of checks do you do on me? Financial. How are you transparent with your budgets? Right? When everybody in here, especially as an organization, you're buying services from companies. Do you care about the dollars you're spending in black and brown spaces? Right? From a diversity standpoint, the services you're procuring, are you doing so from diversified businesses as well? Right? Something to think about. We talked about the office location, the community engagement, right? How are you boots on the ground, wheels on the ground, really supporting the community outside of just asking for donations and contributions? Board. You did a great round robin networking event, right? But have you done board demographics? Right? Like Tom can assume various things about you, but do you know how many master's degrees are in the room? How many people in here have, maybe additional secondary education? Do you know if anybody in here is involved in civil organizations? The age demographic. Really learning about the board, right? Understanding your gaps in your board, right? If everybody in here is a baby boomer, I'm just gonna pick on baby boomer. Sorry if anybody's a baby boomer, but if everybody in here is a baby boomer, right? That's not healthy for an organization, right? Or if everybody was a millennial, that's not healthy for an organization to have not diversity amongst the generations in which you were born in, right? And the only way to do that would be through a board demographic evaluation or survey. Quick 8 to 10 questions allows people to talk about, identify their race. Identify if they recognize as having a disability or a chronic illness or disease. Right? Self-ID is important in that process. You already have a standing committee. One thing I think is important to think about is a mission moment. I started on all the boards that I serve on. You all meet as a board and you get right to the business many times.
Yeah.
Right? Taking a moment in each board meeting or committee meeting to have a mission moment. right? To really have a testimony from someone that you're serving, right? Like, because we're so far removed from the actual work of the agency, it's hard to see that sometimes, right? So maybe, get a donor that's been donating for a couple of years and they can tell a quick 10 minutes of why. Somebody that uses the food bank, come and talk about for 10 minutes of the value of why they, how much it saved their family or impacted their family, right? It really connects the mission a little bit more. So something I would encourage you to think about. From a communication standpoint, we need to get Tom out there. I know he's already out there enough. I don't even know how you get him out there more. But really, in D&I spaces, right? Like shaking hands and kissing babies, right? Tom is a pro at it, by the way. But really, an action pledge, right? Like Tom commits that the organization is going to do X, Y, and Z over the next 3 years, specifically in DE&I space. I know you have a strategic plan, which does that for you, but publicly, how do you do that, right? What's your social media strategy? September 15th, we start Hispanic Heritage Month. What's the organization's plan? Right? Maybe you're serving people, maybe you're not. That's irrelevant. What's the plan? Right? October, National Disability Employment Month. What's the plan? Right? Now, I get this question a lot. We can't do them all. There are so many. There's Grandparents' Day. There's Puppy Day. You can't do them all. I get it. Do the big ones. Start with the big ones. Right? Pride, Juneteenth. Right? Do the big ones. Right? But have a commitment internally and externally to demonstrate your commitment, and the social media is a great way to do that. What's the plan when something else happens in our world that's DE&I related? Something else is going to happen, unfortunately, right? So what's the organization's plan there, right? What's the communication? And again, let's just say, again, not going to rule it. Let's say a person of color is killed, right? Maybe you don't have that's not your space. That's not your lane. But I guarantee you are serving a person of color in some way, shape, or form. And that person in that community, we like to know the organizations that we're connected to are supporting what we're experiencing. Does that make sense? So it doesn't, again, whether you have a board member, whether you have a staff member, whether you have somebody you're serving, there's a certain commitment that is nice to know that people are with us in this space. Right? So what's the organization's plan when that happens? Something for us to think about. And finally, some additional steps I just wanted to mention, right? Adding DE&I to every job description. Right? It's not just one person's job. Right? So how as you rewrite and revisit job descriptions, when you do your performance reviews at the end of the year and you set your goals, everybody should have a DE&I goal. Right? It's not just Tom's job, not just the board committee's job, it's everybody's job. Right? Make it a priority. Right? Make it a priority. Looking at the policies, I talked about policies and procedures. You probably need to have a third party review your employee handbook, your bylaws, right? Here's a quick example. Do you use only he and she throughout your applications, right? In the LGBTQIA plus community, they is an appropriate pronoun choice. Whether you understand it or not is irrelevant. That's a whole other session. Right? But the world is changing. We have to change with it, you're going to get left behind. Right? We need to be thinking about he, she, and they on our website, on our applications. Right? That sends a message when I go to apply, an organization gets it. Right? An organization gets it. So those are some things you can do. I'm going to wrap up with some common text, some things to think about. Do a book club. Right? Do a very informal book club. If you don't read books, do podcasts. Right? Mix it up. Right? Do an article. Right? And then have an honest conversation where you can let your hair down. I don't have any hair to let down, but let your hair down. We're gonna fight. Me and Eric are outside, battle royale outside. Do a book club, right? Like do something like intentionally to keep your learning going, right? So I'm gonna end there. And I wanna know what's on your mind and your heart. What questions can I answer for you? What's on your mind? Respectful of time. Oh, not too bad. Get you back on time. Yes.
Can you explain, I'm familiar with some of it, but what you meant when you said that Pittsburgh is very different about DEI than other spaces?
Yeah, so Pittsburgh sees DE&I through a funnel, meaning that when we talk about it cultural or community-wise, it's only a black-white conversation. So people with disabilities are part of it, LGBTQIA+, folks that are immigrants. Many organizations talk about DE&I from a black people versus white people in the States. And we don't think about services and supports that support those other populations. So an example, interpreters, right? If you get a person where English isn't their first personal language, how do you support them, right? Or a member that's deaf or hard of hearing, do you have somebody available that you can call to do sign language interpretation, right? Those are gaps, fundamental gaps in our services, and we don't, because we talk about it from a black-white conversation. We don't think about mental health. We don't think about non-visual disabilities. So those are some of the opportunities we have as a region to do better. And I think we're rich in this community of nonprofits. There's lots of people that can help you. I would encourage, and I know Melissa's not here, the DEI committee leader or chair, whatever term you use. But as that committee goes forward, I was very proud to see that you all have a committee, because that's what I would say to start. But you're already ahead of that game. The next thing is you do your budget for your next fiscal year. Thinking about bringing in a consultant. And I don't know who that could be, but there's lots of them in this region. Even if it was 5-10 hours a month to help to guide you, to bring that resources, to bring that wealth of knowledge, I think could be beneficial. And you can find one fairly affordable, but putting money behind that goal sends another message. Sends another message of a commitment to the work. So as you get to budgeting, I don't know if you run a calendar year budget.
We're fiscal year.
Fiscal year, yeah. So as you do your next one, just there's a way to think about rationally putting some money aside for that. I think could be beneficial. Great question. Yes.
So from a communication standpoint, a fear of mine is always that we are coming off as ingenuine. So I think it's no secret to everybody in this room that the majority of the people that we serve are white in the North Hills.
No.
There's this stigma that people in the North Hills don't even need our services. Why do we exist? We hear that all the time. It's like a little elevator speech that my team and I practice constantly because it's the number one thing we hear is why do you exist? How many people could you possibly serve? So you saw on our website we have a diversity statement. We can work on all those things that you mentioned, social media, but how do we come off genuine, like to show someone visiting our website that we are doing the work and we're not just putting something out there just to check the boxes?
Yeah, so great question. Couple things I would say. You have to have the community engagement piece that backs it, right? So you, Tom, other staff members need to be outside of North Hills and black and brown spaces, building relationships authentically with organizations that do that work full time, right? So let's use people with disabilities for an example, right? There are many of them. Have a relationship with them to simply demonstrate that you're there, that you're networking with them, you're invited to the table. So I think authentic partnership is the first step in that process. You already do your homework. I know you and Tom well. I don't need to tell you that, but I would tell people to do their homework, right? Come correct independently first. Don't just call your one black friend or your one friend with a disability and ask them questions, right? Do your own homework first. So that would be my second step. My third one, people probably aren't going to like this in this room, but who cares if people don't like what you do, right? Like you have to get to a point where you don't care. And if you post about Hispanic Heritage Month and somebody gets mad, You know, like you do it because it's the right thing to do. You do it because you want to support anybody that represents that community or is connected to that community. And if somebody gets mad, I hate to say this, but you don't need them, right? And that's a bold move, right? Maybe you're gonna lose some money doing it, but sometimes you gotta let the baggage go, right? And that's hard for boards. I get it, because you need donors, you need all of your time, all of your volunteers. I get it. Right? But there's a difference between someone just personally not understanding it and not supporting it versus someone being rude and disrespectful about it, right? Like, keep the person that doesn't understand on board, right? But if someone's actively pushing back, you let them go. And to your question about the website communication, start somewhere, right? Start somewhere. September 15th, as the Medicare, do something, right? Put something on your social media, recognize it, do some things in the office where you talk about it. There's lots of great resources out in the world, but just be authentic about it. And you're going to make mistakes, right? We are humans. There are billions of things in the world we don't know. You're going to make mistakes. When you do, own them. Own each and every one. I had a group call me last week. They were having a luau. Seems okay, right? Not from a DE9 perspective, it's not. Have a summer party. You don't need to have a luau, right? There's a difference between those. And I know that seems very small, right? But employees complain, right? Which makes sense, right? So you're going to make mistakes. So I would say own them. And just as long as you're intentional and authentic, people will recognize that. Great question. Thoughts, feelings? I know this is a tough conversation. The air kind of went out the room. It's okay though. It's tough. I get it, right? It's a hard conversation, right?
I think listening to it in my mind, it's like, okay, I hear everything and I'm taking it in, but it's like, ooh, what do I do with this now? Right? How do I think about this? How do I organize it? How do I take action on it? Like, what do we do with it now?
Yeah, it's a great question.
I'm stuck.
I think independently, each person needs to start where they are, right? Maybe you're at square one, and maybe Joe's further down the line. That question is independently up for you to answer. But again, pick up a book, try a movie, go to a different cuisine. Those are very non-threatening strategy that you can do that will help you grow. And you will non-consciously pick up different things as you do those things, right? So that would be an easy way to start, right? There's some light books, there's some heavy books, right? But really, and independently challenging yourself to learn and grow in this space, I think is important. Organizationally, I think the DEI committee has some agenda items that I think they're going to eventually check off. I hate to use that, but eventually, cross off is completed. But everybody needs to realize this is a marathon, not a sprint, right? You're not going to solve it tomorrow, right? So just enjoy the race, right? Whether you're running it, you're walking it, you're crawling it, you're wheeling it, whatever that is, right? Just enjoy the race and start, right? Like wherever you are in that line, like start. I have friends that have kids, and I tell them, like, when you read your kid a children's book at night, do all the characters look like them? Right? There are many things we can do to really support a Black or brown owned business. Right? There are many things that we can do to really to continue to grow personally as well as professionally. Yeah.
One of the comments that you made that resonates with me is the fact that it's everybody's job from a DNI perspective.
Yeah.
In addition to my day job at BNY Mellon, I'm also a DNI champion. One of the questions that I get most of the time is, why is this different? Because we're trying to institute a DNI ambassador program. We've identified ambassadors in different organizations to help And my answer is always, we're trying to change a culture.
Absolutely.
It's not just about the metrics. It's not just
Absolutely.
about, black and brown business. It's just a matter of when we all show up, how do you make sure that every single one of us, regardless of who you are, what your music genre is, or how you like to travel, or what you like to eat, how do you make sure that every single one of us feels like they have a seat at the table?
Absolutely.
And that is resonating because then we're all coming together from a kumbaya perspective to make sure that the culture is right for every single person. I think that is helping to pivot the conversation in terms of how we can all partner and support and make sure that everybody feels.
So I'm going to pick on Tom. Thank you very much. I'm going to pick on Tom here. You knew this was coming, but I'm gonna be real with you, right? Oftentimes, white men like Tom don't feel like they have a place in the conversation. That's true, right? But two things I would say. One, Tom has other identities besides the fact that he's a white male, right? There are other things about all of us that are important to this conversation. What if Tom practiced a different religion? Or what if Tom, adopted a kid, a black kid, right? Or a brown kid, right? There's more to Tom than the fact of that, right? We need people with power and without power to come together in order to make a change, right? In our country, in the United States, white men have the power. Not saying that we don't have our own power. Please know. And I can back this up with data to support it, right? You all know there's wage differences. You look at the government. I mean, we can go on and on, right? We need people with power and people without, right? To really take their place in this movement to make change, right? No movement in history happened in isolation, right? The civil rights movement had black people, had white people, had brown people, all making change. The disability movement, yes, there were handicapped people crawling steps, but there were people that walked right beside us. So no movement in history happened in isolation. Right? And that's how we need to think about DE&I as we move this work forward. Love the ambassador idea. We do that at Highmark as well. Ambassador. So that's a good model. Questions, comments, thoughts? I want to be respectful. I know you have a packed agenda. Anything else on your mind or your hearts? Okay. Thank you very much, folks.